Hello, everybody. Welcome to Here Comes the Spider-Cast number 20. This is your co-host, Mike L. And as always, I'm joined by...
Joshua Mervell. And today we're going to be looking at Spider-Man comics from January 1982. We're going to be starting off with The Amazing Spider-Man number 224, then moving on to Marvel Team Up 113, and then we're going to finish things off with Peter Parker, The Spectacular Spider-Man number 62.
That's right. And I consider this to be the beginning of phase 2 of the podcast because, lo and behold, Roger Stern has finally moved over to Amazing Spider-Man.
Right. We can say goodbye to Denny O'Neil.
Yes.
And, well, I definitely welcome this new era of Spidey comics that we're going to be reviewing.
I mean, I haven't read every Spider-Man comic, but I would say for at least the first 25 years or so, Denny O'Neil has got to be the weakest writer to ever do the title. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that.
So anyway, without picking on the guy, we're gonna try and be positive here, and we're gonna move on to, better things. And let's talk about this issue of Amazing Spider-Man. We've got a great cover here. Unfortunately, it's marred by one of those infamous banners at the top that says "Win a Columbia 10-speed racer, Formula 10." Details inside. So besides that, we've got an excellent cover here with the Vulture and Spider-Man. What do you think of this cover?
I really like it. I love the silhouette of Toombs in the background. He's kind of like lit in this like pinkish glow, and it kind of shows that like you're going to be focusing a little bit more on maybe his character rather than the Vulture.
Oh, good point.
Then I also do love that there are multiple vultures surrounding Spider-Man, almost like a bunch of vultures would do if they're waiting for like an animal to die or prey to kind of fall so they can all go and attack. So I actually kind of I really like that. It's a pretty cool idea.
Point. And we should also point out that, I mean, yes, Roger Stern is the new writer, but John Romita Jr. thankfully is still penciling
here.
The series.
Right.
He is teamed up with a new inker, Pablo Marcus, who I've definitely come across his name hundreds of times, but I'm not overly familiar with him. But I mean, I think his inks here are fine. What do you think?
Yeah. I think they led well to Romita Jr.'s work, so I think he did a pretty good job in this issue.
All right.
I will say, actually, though, I really like John Romita Jr., and I think that this comic is actually really great with a lot of the layout and the storytelling through the art. But the first panel on original page 2, digital 3 with Aunt May looks terrifying.
Okay, let me see here. Okay. Yes. I have pointed this out before that John Romita Jr., God bless him, he sometimes doesn't care if his characters look pretty.
Yeah.
He and especially in his 90s style, he draws some pretty grotesque faces and some grotesque anatomy. And this is kind of an example where, unfortunately, Pablo Marcus is not prettying up his pencils. And so, yeah, like you said, that's kind of an ugly shot, man.
Right. I mean, even her hand holding the phone, like she has these really pointy claws almost.
Right.
Like, yeah, she looks very disheveled and like tired. Like the lines under her eyes don't look like bags, or wrinkles, they look like bags under her eyes. So I think that kind of makes me feel even further that it's like a gross image of Aunt May.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like Pablo Marcus is emphasizing the wrong things. Like, there's a way to make a face or a figure look good, and unfortunately, he's not doing it here.
Right, and even like the pointy chin too.
Right.
Like it's so it's a little too exaggerated, I think.
Right.
I mean, even looking at the picture next to it of Aunt May in the next panel, I don't think it looks bad.
No, yeah, you're right.
Like it looks a lot better than the first one, but for some reason.
Well, also if you look at the shadow on Aunt May's nose there on digital page 3, and then go down to the close up of Peter's face, I will say that is a very I'll say it's an un-Jim Mooney-esque face. That's clearly the work of a different inker. Like, that's
Right.
so distinct. And as far as I understand it, John Romita Jr. was only doing layouts at this point. He wasn't doing full pencils. So I think a lot of those details we owe to Pablo Marcus. So
Yeah.
he's definitely imprinting his own style in here, which is fine. But yeah, it's just not quite as appealing as previous inkers, right?
Yeah. And you know what? I actually like the panel with the close-up of Peter Parker. I thought that one works, and it's definitely much more pleasant to look at than the Aunt May one.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
And, I got to say, I mean, I can only assume that this isn't just a layover from Spectacular Spider-Man, but that Roger Stern knew that he was writing amazing. And so I think he kind of does a little bit of a fresh start here. So we start off with a pretty basic, like, okay, here's Peter Parker, here's Aunt May, here's the status quo, right? And then here we go, the most basic of all superhero plots, a bank robbery, right? Which he can foil. So for a new reader, this is kind of a really good opening, a really simple, way to open up the story. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it really shows that Spider-Man's kind of like at the top of his game. There's a little introduction. I think that he talks about having to balance his personal life and his superhero life a little bit,
right?
And then it kind of jumps into him saving the day with the bank robber. So I definitely think it was a fun, nice little introduction, and it also leads into the story later on when Parker is trying to develop those pictures, and then J. Jonah Jameson bursts in. Right,
good
so there's
point,
kind of a good reason for him. Like, oh man, I just saved the day and I took pictures of it, and now they're ruined, so I've got to go do something else. And it just so happens that I think Robertson runs in and he says that the Vulture's loose again, so he's off to go save the day. And that's how it kind of ties in with that story. So I think it works because he sets up Spider-Man, and then it also gives Spider-Man a nice in to go save the day.
Right. And then, but before we get to that part, I love the way they reintroduced the Vulture here, because there's just something about the way that Roger Stern took what is this? 1, 2, 3 full pages just to introduce his status quo.
Yeah.
He's injured. He's in a hospital. He's talking to the security guard. And just look at about how much detail he puts into setting up, like, oh, well, this is like a rehab, not a rehab, but a like a physical rehabilitation kind of area.
Right.
And he's talking about, and just the fact that he establishes the details of exactly what's going on. And then, he's like, and the technicians haven't finished connecting all the Magno electronics yet. It's obviously, I don't know if that's quite accurate as far as reality, but I don't really care. At least there's an attempt there, right?
Right. Yeah. It's something to set up a reason or like an in for the Vulture to make his escape. Right.
Right.
And it's not just something that's kind of thrown in.
Exactly.
Like he just finds his suit or something. Like, oh, I've got my suit. Like it's kind of a cool way to have him escape and reintroduce this character,
which is
I mean,
and
even for people who don't know who the Vulture is, like this is a great kind of reintroduction. Like you don't really get much of his backstory, but you kind of get the gist of who he is as a person.
Exactly.
And with the almost like reintroduction of Spider-Man at the beginning too. Right. I think this is like a really great entry point for somebody who wants to read a Spider-Man comic.
Exactly. And we also get introduced to Nathan Lubinsky, who's Aunt May's, sort of boyfriend at this point, right?
Right.
So he is tied into the story as well. So again, we go back to that whole thing about how a really good Spider-Man story always ties in his private life, right? Which is with his superhero life.
Yeah.
So we've got that here. So of course, this almost reminds me of something that Lex Luthor would do, but Adrian Toomes is left to his own devices. And of course, he's able to construct a ramshackle version of his Vulture suit just with what's laying around, which I think is awesome, right? And then he escapes, and of course, and then he's at large again, which I think is so cool. Then we go back to that scene you mentioned of him developing the photos, and we get some funny stuff with, what's his name, Lance Bannon and Bannon.
Right.
So that's pretty cool. And then from there, we go to what's his name? The Vulture, basically doing some more bank robberies, right?
Right.
And
And I really love. There's one shot, one panel on original page 12, digital 13.
okay,
It's the last panel there. It's just a silhouette of the vulture, but they always show him in silhouettes, and I think that has to do with, again, going back to the vulture motif, where like a lot of times when you see vultures, you don't ever see them close up. You
Sure.
always see them in the sky circling. And when they're up in the sky, the sun's behind them, so they're always kind of cast in shadow, and it's just the silhouette that you see kind of circling. So I'm really loving that that they're putting him in shadows all the time.
That's a good point,
really
because
cool.
even on the original page 13, the middle panel at the top, he's a silhouette or a shadow. Sorry, the bottom right, it's another shadow.
Right.
So yeah, you're right. That's a really good way of depicting him.
Mm-hmm.
We also get some. I gotta point out, we get some classic ugly John Romita old man faces in here. Like, I just want to jump back to sorry, page where is this? Digital page 8, original page 7. Like the
Okay.
close-up shots of Vulture's face. He just looks so like grotesque, like his
Yeah,
jaw and his nose.
I don't mind it for the vulture.
No, I love it.
Yeah. I think it definitely fits with his character. I
Right.
love that he has like this gross, like hooked nose
Right.
that looks like a vulture's beak.
Exactly.
Like the way his neck kind of bends up even looks like a vulture's neck, like the long, like crooked neck. I think it's, really cool.
Oh, I agree. This is all good stuff here.
Mm-hmm.
I just love how he goes back to his apartment, and he gets back into his regular clothes, and it's just, I don't know. This has just got a real classic Spidey feel to it. The whole issue, I love it.
Yeah.
And then we jump to Spider-Man swinging over the city, bouncing around on rooftops. Classic Spider-Man stuff again. Then he goes to visit Aunt May, gets some of that in there, and then of course, go ahead.
Real quick, while we're talking about him bouncing around, in this issue particularly, I really love that they use the action lines to like make your eye follow to the next panel. Like
Sure.
the action really flows well. On that page you were talking about, original 15, digital 16, Spider-Man in like the middle top panel, he's like bouncing, and you see a bunch of arcs.
Yes.
And that arc is leading right to where Spider-Man is in the next panel, and I think it just flows so well.
Good point. Yep.
I think earlier on, when he's stopping the bank robbers too, there was something that really made me like
At the
really
beginning?
stuck out. Yeah. Oh, it was when he was doing a backflip off the table after hanging up with Aunt May on page 2. He flips, and the action lines lead directly to the action lines where he bounces into the bathroom.
Yeah, that's true. Yep.
It's so good. Like I really love that. It's small. It's not super important, but I think that it really adds something to the storytelling in the art,
Right,
that you can follow the action of what's happening, and you can almost picture it exactly how he's jumping.
Good point.
Where a lot of the times it's just kind of like Spider-Man in the air, and then the next panel is him landing on the ground, and you're just like, oh yeah, he must have flipped or done something to get there.
Mm-hmm.
They're able to kind of tell that story without showing you every single step he took.
It's also fascinating because I listened to an interview with John Romita Jr. Last summer, and I remember him saying that his style, the style that he developed, is a deadline style. So basically, he just learned how to make deadlines. Now, I'm not saying that it's kind of like he's only putting as much detail as you need to tell the story, put it that way.
Right.
Like any professional TV, episode director has to learn how to tell a story, but also how to get the episode in on time. And if you're going to be a professional comic book artist for Marvel or DC, that's how you've got to draw. And as we know, John Romita Jr., in his whole career, I don't know if he's ever been late with an assignment. Contrast that with other artists who are notoriously late. Like, there are comics published in the 90s and the 2000s that we're still waiting to see completed because the artists haven't finished them. But like John Romita, again, not only is he one of my favorite artists, but he always gets the job done, and he's a great storyteller. Like, I don't know, there's just so many reasons I like him, you know?
Right. He's learned how to properly tell a story through art, and he's efficient about it.
Right.
I think that's the key, right? It's not, his work isn't muddled and muddied with all of this extra detail and like fluff. It's
Right.
very straight to the point. The figures are very like structured, and you can see what they're doing. The action lines and the action themselves is very straightforward. When it's like buildings or set pieces, everything feels like it's properly laid out and where it's supposed to be, and it doesn't really jump around or change.
Right.
I really think that he has like a strong understanding of storytelling through art, and he's just kind of honed his craft so well that he's able to meet those deadlines and you know, continue to tell these stories over and over again.
Absolutely. And you want to talk about storytelling? Let's go to original page 16.
Okay.
He's enters the, whatever the cafeteria is of this place, and he's walking towards the table where Nathan Lubinsky's playing cards, and we just see an arm on the left side, and he's getting closer and closer, and then his spider sense is going off, right? We don't know why.
Right.
Flip the next page, it's the Vulture, right? As Adrian Toomes shaking his hand.
Right.
I love that introduction there.
It's very good.
Yep. Now, one thing that I got to admit that's a little bit awkward here is I can't tell if Vulture knows who Spider-Man is. Like, why does he pull a gun on this guy?
He says that he saw Peter's face and realizes that Peter recognized him as the Vulture.
Okay. He says
because I don't think that, like, Toomes doesn't have a secret identity. Like, the Vulture
Right.
is Toomes, and Toomes is the Vulture, correct? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's kind of like a weird line that they don't really cross.
Right.
Because they definitely call him Toomes at the beginning when he's going through therapy.
Right.
So I'm not sure.
It's a little bit awkward, but it's not terrible, but it's just sort of a moment where I was just a little bit confused, but that's okay.
You know what? Maybe that's also why they always cast him in shadow too when he's doing stuff. Is like he's always kind of lunging down from the sky, so you never really get a good look at him.
Sure.
I should look through this again and see if there's any moments where like the Vulture, like Toomes as the Vulture, has any interactions with anybody.
Yeah.
Like face to face.
Well, I mean, we're definitely we find out at the bottom of page 18 that he definitely doesn't know the Peter Parker Spider-Man because right he's like, oh well, Peter Parker left and I'm here, one of those typical ridiculous things, but that's okay.
Right.
So then we get like a little fight scene between the two in this rest home or whatever it is, which is kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get another slightly awkward storytelling scene where Vulture sort of grabs Nathan and is threatening to kill him, but then he acknowledges that he doesn't realize that it was him. Now, I don't know if that was added in later with dialogue. It was kind of an awkward moment because he's like, what, Nathan? He's like, I didn't know that I grabbed you. I just reached for the closest warm body. I don't know if that was just added later in dialogue because it was a little bit confusing, because then
Right.
2 panels later, he just sort of tosses him back to Spider-Man. So a little bit weird, but not bad. What did you think of that?
I kind of took it that it was done on purpose, like that was their way of ending the fight, was he realizes that he's hurting somebody that's helped him,
Sure.
so he decides to just kind of escape instead. But it's definitely, I don't dislike it, but it's also not that I like really loved it.
Sure. Yeah.
But it was definitely a new kind of take on ending a story or ending a conflict.
I guess it kind of shows another dimension to the Vulture, right? 'Cause
Right,
he's
yeah.
not completely ruthless.
Right, he's a little human. Like, if the people that he cares about, he cares about. He's not being evil just to be evil.
Right.
So,
Yeah, so then that pretty much wraps up that. Spidey turns back into Peter, gets reunited with Aunt May and everybody, and we sort of have a happy ending, sort of.
I love how nonchalant he is when he comes back.
Yeah.
Looks like I missed all the excitement.
Yep.
Like, Peter, what happens? Like, oh yeah, Vulture tied me up, but Spider-Man saved me. No big deal.
Awesome. That's like a classic Superman Clark Kent type thing.
Yeah,
right?
it is. Yeah.
So, and then it kind of ends again. It's a done in one, right? So,
Right.
a perfect introduction, a perfect jumping on point for Spider-Man. So there you go. A great issue. I definitely recommend this issue. What about
Yeah.
you?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Classic Spidey. I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we'll jump over to Marvel Team Up number 113. Now, I've actually already reviewed this on Quasar Chronology, so I know
Right.
this issue inside and out, so I will let you take it from here, Josh.
Okay. Yeah, so we have Spider-Man teaming up with Quasar in this comic. We first see Spider-Man kind of run into him when his spider sense goes off and he jumps down on this Project Pegasus van. And after seeing that first splash page and I saw the big van with the horse on it, I was like, oh, here we go. We're going to get back into like some nerdy Quasar being like being like a police officer almost. And yeah, it was really fun. We have I can't remember this the Living Light, is that what his name is?
Living Laser.
Living Laser.
Yes.
So we have him. He's trapped in one of Quasar's bands, and he takes over Quasar, and he's trying to find a cure, I think. And Quasar ends up pushing him out of the band, and he becomes human again. And
he's
pretty much the end of it.
No, I was wrong. It's Lightmaster.
Lightmaster. Okay.
Right. Living Laser. I think it's a different character, but anyway. And you know what? I got to say, I reviewed this issue with my friend Marshall and his son, and there's a one part that we could not figure out because it's completely confusing. So Quasar is battling Lightmaster.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, because Lightmaster has come out of his quantum bands, and then all of a sudden, they're standing there talking to each other, and then Quasar is like, his energy crawling up my arm. I'm going numb all over. And then the next thing you know, we just don't see Quasar. Like, now it's just Lightmaster for like the rest of the issue.
Right. I assumed that he was like completely engulfed by Lightmaster.
Sure, but it's just weird they don't show it though, you know?
I think that they do. Isn't there like a couple of panels where you see... Yeah, so on original 13, you see that it's Lightmaster, and you can see the silhouette of Quasar.
Okay, yes, you're right. But it is weird that they didn't show that moment where that happened, you know?
Yeah, they definitely don't set that up where you see Quasar inside, like when it first happens.
Exactly. That's what I mean, yeah.
Yeah, they don't... Let me go back to where it first happens. Yeah, you don't really see it.
No. So it's a little bit confusing. So, yeah, so Spider-Man, then he starts fighting the Lightmaster in Quasar's body, but it looks just like an outline of a guy. And again, I went over this ad nauseum with Marshall because he couldn't figure out the plot. But so beyond the big fight scene, so what happens after that?
Spider-Man goes and he gives himself a little upgrade to his suit. These polarized lenses that will help from being blinded. And then Quasar and Lightmaster have like a little internal battle where they're kind of like fighting for power. Right. And then Quasar, he says some like space jargon. I've already learned that it's futile to contend with him for control of my power bands. My only alternative is to shut myself down. There, I've turned off each transmitter crystal and expunged whatever reserved energy remained. Like, I didn't even realize there were crystals and stuff in the bands. Like, they just look like big golden bands. Are those, like, bubbles on the band's crystals?
I don't know.
Okay.
but the thing is that I know that he's like, the reason he's called Quasar is because his bands access the power of quasars. So I guess that's how he draws the energy through these transmitter crystals, right?
Right. It definitely it makes sense. I guess they didn't describe it well here, and I just never really thought of them as crystals. So that's why I was like, oh, interesting. I didn't realize.
Yeah.
So yeah, so turning off the power pretty much on his bands cuts the bond between the two of them, and Lightmaster turns back into a human.
Yes.
And he just kind of like takes off his supervillain mask.
Yeah.
I mean, even the characters don't understand what's going on. Like,
no,
he takes off the mask and says, "I'm human again. You must have found a way to resurrect me. I don't understand what happened."
I know. And then, of course, Spider-Man just punches him out. And then
Right.
it's kind of interesting because then Quasor's like, "What? Why did you do that? He was too disoriented to cause any harm." "Oh, yeah? He was about to zap you. Trust me, my ever-reliable spider sense warned me of the danger." And then Quasor's like, "Well, perhaps, but now that Lansky is corporeal again, his light suit wouldn't have made a match for my wristbands. You should know how to make a guy feel useful. Well, since you seem to have everything under control, I'll leave Lightmaster to your high and mighty hands. Bye." And then I love this where Spider-Man's like, "What a bozo. I usually find something to like about most any of the Joes I sometimes joined forces with, but that stuffed shirt really rubs me the wrong way." And then Quasar thinks, "A strange fellow, that Spider-Man. He acts so unprofessional, so undisciplined. Oh well, I'd best turn Lansky over to the authorities and get on with my business." It's just a weird ending, eh?
Yeah, I think that Quasar and Spider-Man could really be a fun match together if maybe they were given more time or a better story, because
Sure.
Spider-Man does seem to be kind of like loosey-goosey with how he works and how he acts. He kind of rolls with the punches. He'll fight a villain, and then from there he'll kind of come up with a way to defeat them and upgrade suits and stuff, which I really liked that he did in this issue.
Right.
And Quasar is very by the book. He's very kind of like almost like a nerdy cop, like a nerdy space cop.
Sure.
With how he
exactly.
acts and talks. So like that dynamic could be really fun. It would be almost like a buddy cop movie where you have like the by the book cop and then the other cop that's kind of that rolls with the punches and does whatever needs to get done to, finish the job.
Sure. We should also point out this is written by Mark Granwald, who also he wrote pretty much all of the latter day Quasar appearances and the Quasar monthly series. So, like I said before, he is the adopted father of Quasar. He didn't create him, but
Right.
he really defined his personality. So maybe this is his commentary on Spider-Man. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've read this issue before, and it was definitely solid, but not as good as the issue of Amazing or Spectacular this month. What do you think?
No, I think this was the weakest one we've read this month,
Right.
but I also enjoyed it though. Like there weren't enough like glaring flaws where I was like annoyed by anything in particular. Right. I think it was fine.
Definitely entertaining. The art, as always, by Herb Trimpe, good as usual. Marshall actually really liked the art. And if you are interested in hearing a 36-minute review of that comic, it's available in Quasar Chronology number 10 on YouTube and our website.
Yeah, check it out.
Yeah. Okay, so now let's jump to Peter Parker, The Spectacular Spider-Man number 62. This issue is also significant because it's the first regular issue of returning writer Bill Mantlo, because he did have a run on Spectacular before Roger Stern took over. So
Right.
We've discussed him before a little bit, but he's most famous for doing Micronauts. He did the Hulk for many years. He did Rom Space Knight. He wrote, I believe, the first or second issue of Transformers. So he was kind of their go-to guy for licensed properties. So again, like I said, he's got kind of a cult following on the internet these days. He wasn't really popular in his day when he was writing, but again, like a lot of people really like his stuff. And honestly, judging by this issue, I can see why. I really enjoyed it. What about you?
Yeah, I it felt a little bit old-fashioned compared to the other ones.
Okay.
Like it felt more on like the corny superhero story side for me.
Sure.
I enjoyed it though. Like I definitely enjoyed it more than the team up. So I think overall it was a really good issue, but it definitely I felt like it had a little bit of a different flavor from the other two that we read.
Sure. Okay, so yeah, well, I'll summarize the story. So it's again by Bill Mantlo. The art is by Ed Hannigan and Jim Mooney, and I think the art's great personally. I really like the art. We're introduced to a character named Goldbug, who honestly I don't think I've ever seen before.
No, I don't think so.
No.
Not for me at least. Yeah.
And so he's kind of being hired on by the Magia, who's the Marvel Universe version of the Mafia.
Mafia. Mm-hmm.
And they're giving him this assignment with because what is it? He can turn things into gold. I can't even remember what his power is.
Yeah, he can turn things into gold with his like ray gun that he's got.
Yeah.
So I don't know why like he's super effective.
Yeah, good question. Good
for
point.
like to steal gold. Why wouldn't they just hire him to make gold for them?
Yeah, I'm
like
not sure about
wouldn't that be a better story?
Uh-huh.
Like I don't know.
We'll see how I can't even. I just read this and I can't even quite remember how it turns out. But we'll this will refresh my memory by going through it. But basically,
Right.
Peter Parker is doing again tying in the private life. Peter Parker is doing an experiment with gold at Empire State University. And so they're unloading a truck. I don't know if this would ever happen in real life, but they're unloading like a truckload of gold. What is it called? Gold bullion?
Gold, yeah, gold
It's just
bars
stacks
or something.
of gold
yeah.
bars, yeah, which again, they've got armed guards and everything protecting it. But it's just kind of funny that a university student has been given all this gold to experiment with.
Right.
So,
and the experiment is to just like shoot it with radiation
yeah.
to figure out what happens. Like
Sure.
I don't quite understand what the
No, but
what
you know
they're
what?
trying to do. I think they say something like, "Oh yeah, wouldn't it be great if they're scientists are going to be so happy if they if they know what happens to precious metals after a nuclear war."
Yeah, but then
like-
he says, but we can't speculate about what they're going to do with this information. We just have to do the experiment. So it's kind of
Right.
yeah.
So it's like that's a kind of a bad experiment if you're just doing it to see what happens rather than like having
like,
your
a goal.
reason to
Right. Yeah, you know what's funny though? Like, I don't want to be too forgiving, but because it's meant for kids, I'm just grateful that there is any explanation for why
Sure.
this is happening. So again, when I was growing up watching Saturday morning cartoons, or Transformers or G.I. Joe, I was just grateful that they even attempted to root it in the real world, so I thought it was okay. I didn't mind that
Yeah.
explanation. But it's also kind of funny because we start off with Peter dressed up as Spider-Man taking pictures of them unloading the gold, and so the first thing that happens is he gets in trouble from his professor for being late for his own experiment, right?
Right. Well, actually, even before that, I love that we had like I think you had mentioned that we saw Goldbug getting the job from the
Right.
Magia, but I love that it's almost like a little epilogue before the story starts.
I believe it's prologue, right? If it's before
sorry,
the main
prologue.
story.
Yes,
Yeah.
you're
yeah,
right.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that too.
Yeah, it almost feels like a cold open before we get the
Sure.
splash page introducing Spider-Man.
Yep.
Yeah, it almost feels like an opening to a lot of the Marvel movies where they just start and they have like the first scene and then the Marvel logo and then
Sure.
like the
Yep.
fanfare and introduction and everything, and then they jump into the
Absolutely.
movie.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, it's great.
Mm-hmm.
So then we get into again back to the supporting cast with Deborah Whitman, a little bit of development there with the relationship. It's almost funny because Jim Mooney is such a strong inker, he gives it that 1950s look, and so at the bottom of page 5, we get this shot of Deborah Whitman looking almost at the camera, and it looks like an old romance comic, eh?
Yeah.
At the original page 5. And it's also funny because as Peter is walking away with this other girl, what is
Marcy
it?
Kane.
Marcy?
Marcy Kane, yeah.
Yeah. It's just so funny because then Deborah, we can see that she's upset and kind of jealous, and then in this little caption box we see, engrossed in his discussion with Marcy Kane, Peter Parker forgets all about Deborah Whitman. She, however, is finding it increasingly more difficult to forget him. And then, she's like, oh, Peter. And then she's kind of like thinking about him. And then it's funny because then the next box, the next panel, the caption actually says her thoughts, borrowed perhaps from too many Gothic novels, or interrupted as Dr. Morris Sloan emerges from his office. It's just kind of funny that
Yeah.
it's like Bill Mantlo is acknowledging his own writing. It's kind of funny, And, you know what I mean? Like the cliched
Yeah, for
aspects
sure.
of his own writing. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, and I think because this feels more of like closer to that classic corny superhero comic, calling attention to the melodrama in it too is kind of fun.
Sure. Yeah.
Rather than it just kind of like feeling like a trope, it's playing into it instead.
Yeah, exactly. So then they start this experiment again, and it's like, okay, I can't even remember what is it he's trying to do. Goldbug. So he's got his gold ship, and he almost looks like Blue Beetle at this point, eh?
Literally, all he wants is the gold. Like that's the only goal. Because so he bursts in and he blasts all the police officers and turns them into gold.
Can we point out, the worst panel of dialogue in this whole issue? I got to point this out, okay? You just mentioned it. So when he bursts in, he comes in through the ceiling. There's a giant shot of him kind of standing over Peter Parker's body that's covered in rubble. This is original page 9. Then the cops say, look, a guy in a gold suit coming in through the roof, and he's dropped the ceiling on the kid who was conducting this experiment. Careful, he's got some kind of gun pointed straight at us. Oh, terrible dialogue. Anyway.
But I think it's followed by maybe some of my favorite dialogue of the issue because it's so villainous and fun.
Okay.
We have Goldbug in the first panel of original 10. He says, I call it my gold gun, gentlemen. Guess why?
Yeah.
And then the next panel is them like completely solid gold. I thought that was so fun.
Yes, that is good. Yep.
Yeah, it genuinely brought a smile to my face because it was just so cheesy, but like that classic supervillain awful catchphrase or line of dialogue.
He's having. I mean, he technically is probably killing these guys, but he's having fun doing it, right?
Right, which is I think even more shocking when he also turns Deb Whitman into solid gold.
Right.
So his gold bug mobile blasts off with the gold, and Peter Parker comes up with some sort of concoction that just makes them not gold again.
Yeah, I give him props for at least acknowledging that he is a scientist, so he would know how to turn. Like he basically says, right, I need an acid solution that will melt through the gold, but won't burn the skin underneath. I must mix the acid solution correctly and quickly. Now, first of all, if such a thing exists, it would be nice to actually tell us what it is.
Right.
So it's kind of a cop-out to not even say what it is. Like, I don't care if you make up, just say it's dilithium crystals, but at least make up something. Right. Also, I got to point out, in the time it took me to read those 2 pages, Deborah Whitman would have been long dead. Yeah. Let alone the fact that it's like later on, Deborah Whitman would have suffocated within unless she took a nice breath, she'd be dead within a 20 seconds, anyway. Which I thought was kind of funny. But anyway, Deborah Whitman's fine. Mm-hmm. So now Peter Parker is going to go and track down Goldbug. I also got to point out, but because Goldbug kind of reminds me of Blue Beetle, I thought this art gave a little bit of a Steve Ditko vibe. What did you think?
Yeah, I could definitely see that with like the solid colors of.
That's true because that's the way.
It's almost like a Silver Surfer kind of thing,
right? And also, just I don't know. I just found the layouts and like the heavy blacks and just like the small panels. It wasn't exactly like a Ditko book, but I just wonder if that's what they're going for. Maybe it's a coincidence. I don't know.
Yeah.
But we got some really cool storytelling on original page 14 when the 2 guards are standing outside of the doorway, and we see. I love it when they do this when Peter Parker crawls into the frame over the course of 3 panels. Just so cool, And then he pulls the guy out of the frame on the row below that. Really well done there, eh?
Yeah, it's really great.
Mm-hmm. Almost reminds me of Frank Miller a little bit, of what Frank Miller was doing around this time too.
Right. Yeah, it does kind of feel very Batman.
Yeah.
To like hide in the shadows and then, like use like a grappling hook to pull a guy up, and the other guy's like, "What? Where'd you go?" And then he comes down for the other guy. I mean, even later on page 17, when Spider-Man first kind of reveals himself to all of the goons and to Goldbug, he jumps down onto the gold Spider-Mobile. Sure. And he's cast in shadow from like the chest up. You could see the silhouette of his eyes.
Right.
And it feels very Batman, and I thought it was like a really cool panel.
Yeah, I mean, I like Spider-Man to be light, but when you go back and read those Steve Ditko early issues, it was pretty gritty. Mm-hmm. And so I do like when they make Spider-Man a little bit more gritty like this. Like, you know, that's why it's like, even though it's almost like Amazing Spider-Man is more like the John Romita Sr. issues of Spider-Man when it was all really lighthearted. Right. And this is more like the Steve Ditko Spider-Man. I don't know if it was conscious, but it's kind of a nice contrast, you know? Mm-hmm. So, yeah, so go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's also not too dark, too. Like, I think that it's a little bit more serious mixed in with the tones of like those like old comics. So I thought it was a nice blend. Right. So I didn't mind it or think it was too dark, but I definitely see what you're saying though. Like it's not like Spider-Man to kind of jump down and be cast in shadow, and he's normally kind of swinging and I mean, I guess he does still like do a one-liner real quick, but
sure. But I think it's also more, what I'm saying is more like the way that Denny O'Neil was doing Spider-Man, and the way that Spider-Man's drawn by John Romita Jr., and the way the colors are so bright, it just feels a little bit more like of a typical superhero story. And this is a little bit like just the fact that, again, it's the Magia, that they're involved and they're down at the docks. Like you said, it's a little bit more like Batman, or even like The Spirit by Will Eisner. It just feels a little bit grittier, you know? And like the panels are smaller. It just gives it a slightly different vibe than Amazing Spider-Man, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
So I definitely appreciate it. And so basically the story wraps up by Spider-Man pulling off Goldbug's gloves and revealing that Goldbug has been poisoned with radiation poisoning. And so it's kind of interesting because even though they were just fighting, he's trying to protect Goldbug, but the Magia ends up shooting him. And so again, it's kind of a what is this called? Not a Pyrrhic victory, but it's like Spider-Man wins, but he kind of loses, right? Because he did want to, even though Goldbug and him were fighting, he didn't want him to die, and so that's what ends up happening in the end. So, so yeah, I really
so
like
the Magia still gets what was coming to them, and the gold gets returned, but he couldn't save Goldbug in the end,
right? And I just love there's even just like this really nice, tiny, skinny panel at the very bottom of the last page and it says, "Out of sight, the Amazing Spider-Man cleaves through the murky river, his body numbed by the frigid waters, his mind numbed by the night's aborted successes and failures." The end. Again, I'm not saying this is T.S. Eliot, but I'm saying I appreciate it because I'm reading a comic and I'm getting some decent prose in there, you know? So I really surprisingly enjoy this. And this is weird because like, when I first started getting into Spider-Man really heavy, like around 87, 88, I went back and I bought as many of these back issues as I could. But, you know, I'm sure just like anyone, when you get into comics, you kind of create an arbitrary... I mean, unless you're going to try and collect every single issue of a long-running character, you kind of create an arbitrary cutoff point where you're like, okay, well, I'm going to go back to this issue and I'm going to stop there. I'm not going to go back any further. Whether it's, you know, the first issue by a certain writer or a certain character. So for me, it was always the first appearance of the Hobgoblin. That's where I started. Then I extended it back to actually around this month, the first issue where Roger Stern took over Amazing. But I never went back and got the Peter David issues of Spectacular. I did have a few of them, but I was just never as interested in getting those issues. And so this is almost like, you know, discovering, you know, I don't know what, like episodes of Star Wars that you didn't know existed. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, this is a godsend for me to find these comics, and I'm really enjoying them. So this is great.
That's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, I recommend this issue too. I don't know about you, but I'm actually really looking forward to more issues by Bill Mantlo. What about you?
Yeah, I think that all of the issues are starting to get better and better for me. So
Right.
I'm definitely excited that we're maybe getting away from the Denny O'Neil era.
Right, and also, yeah, Marvel Team Up is still a little bit uneven. I'm not sure where that's going to go, but I think we're definitely headed for better territory for Spidey.
Yeah, the past few have definitely been a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like they're getting better and better. I mean, even with the last two, with the Doctor Strange team up was a little bit weird, but at least they were trying to do something new with it,
right?
And trying to tie Spider-Man into the story. I think with the Quasar one, I think he really fit into that story. Like, it felt like he had a purpose to be there and was kind of there with the character.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
Yep. Like, I know we're going back and talking about the other issue again, but when he first bumps into him, it's just because his Spidey sense is going off, and he checks in with him. He's just like, is everything okay? Mm-hmm. Yep, we're all fine. And then they split and part ways. Yep. And then because he checked in on him, that's how, like, that's where the connection came from, and he just goes back to help him again. So I thought that, he had a little bit of there's a stronger reason for him to actually be in that story, rather than, oh, we're going to send you on this space adventure through, like, time and space just because.
Oh, boy. Yeah.
Right.
Good point. Yep.
So.
Yeah, so overall, a good month for Spidey, and again, like I said, this is phase 2 for me. So I think we're headed for some really good territory here coming up.
Yeah, I agree. I'm pretty excited. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. So next week we will be reviewing Amazing Spider-Man 225, Marvel Team Up 114 with the Falcon and Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man number 63. With the return of Harry Osborn, Liz Allen, and the Molten Man.
So I think that's going to be it for this week for Here Comes the Spider-Cast. You can check us out on Twitter at Comic Syndicate, and then on Facebook at The Comic Book Syndicate. We always post our videos and the comics that we're going to be reading there, so we want you guys to go and comment and share what you think about the episodes and the issues that we're talking about too. We'd love to keep that conversation going.
That's right. So until next Monday, this has been Here Comes the Spider-Cast.
All right, see you later.